This just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
As of yet unconfirmed that a plane has hit the World Trade Center. And
in fact, we heard it, and because I was just like standing there pretty much looking out the window, I didn't see what caused it or if there was an impact.
So you have no idea right now?
There's another one. Another plane just hit. Oh my God. Another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion. My God, it's right in the middle of the building.
Did you just see this happen, Jennifer?
Matt, I've never seen any. It looks like a movie. I saw a large plane, like a jet, go immediately headed directly into the World Trade Center. It just flew into it.
A national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center.
Of what was said during those
They're just saying they're citing transmission to know that the plane had been hijacked. That's all that they're saying about it at this point. We also...
That the Pentagon is being evacuated as well. All of this coming on the heels of a large fire at the Pentagon, and we can't tell you at this moment.
Yeah, Aaron, there is a lot of confusion here at the Pentagon. It appears that something hit the Pentagon on the outside of the 5th corridor located.
Wow.
And some people were...
Jamie, I need you to stop for a second. There has just been a huge explosion. We can see a billowing smoke rising. And I'll tell you that I can't see that 2nd tower, but there was a cascade of sparks and fire. And now it looks almost like a mushroom cloud explosion, this huge billowing smoke in the...
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daly down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The 2nd building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
Thanks very much.
It has completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking
exactly,
about.
The 2nd.
Yeah, and
unprecedented. And it's going to be...
And every time you say that, I'm going to go immediately to Washington now, but every time you say that, I keep thinking of how we are told time and time and time again by the Pentagon and by the State Department that they know something's going on in the world today.
They seem to have the problem at the North Tower, Peter.
Let's look at the North Tower quickly.
Seems to be coming down.
Oh my God.
The second tower.
It's hard to put it into words, and maybe one doesn't need to.
Before those towers collapsed. And as they collapsed on the ground in the immediate vicinity of the World Trade Centers, of course there was chaos and confusion and yes, some panic. Some people in desperation were seen leaping from the towers before they collapsed. More buildings are being evacuated downtown. The commander-in-chief at Ground Zero of the attack on America.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
The country gets ready to strike back in a war against terror.
This nation is peaceful, but fierce when stirred to anger.
Ladies and gentlemen, in memory of those that lost their lives on 9/11, I'm going to ask us to start today by observing a moment of silence in their memory. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Scott Brower, and I'm the director of the Bass Military Scholars Program at Vanderbilt University. and I'm an advisory board member for the Fort Campbell Historical Foundation. And on behalf of both organizations, I want to welcome you to today's Jack B. Turner Leadership Series panel entitled America's Military Response to 9/11, Special Operations in Afghanistan. The Jack B. Turner Leadership Series is named after Jack Turner, a Vanderbilt alumni, a Vanderbilt Army ROTC graduate, and a pillar of the Fort Campbell community. We were thankful to have both Jack, his lovely wife Margie, and many other family members here with us today. Also with us today are several members of the Lee and Ramona Bass Foundation, along with many of Vanderbilt's Bass Military Scholars, a one-of-a-kind service program for veterans pursuing advanced degrees at Vanderbilt University, who upon graduation will continue to serve our nation in a new and exciting capacity. The mission of the Bass Military Scholars Program and the Fort Campbell Historical Foundation overlap significantly. The Bass Military Scholars Program asks their scholars to share their military experience with the Vanderbilt community in a meaningful way. The Fort Campbell Historical Foundation is committed to educating, honoring, and inspiring. Educating Americans about service, sacrifice, our history, and civics, while honoring the combat formations that call Fort Campbell, Tennessee, home, and then inspiring America's youth to continue to serve in some capacity. As President Bush stated earlier in the video that we just played, this nation is peaceful, but fierce when stirred to anger. Ladies and gentlemen, the men sitting before you are some of those who were called upon to lead our nation's response after we had been stirred to anger. Joining us today on the panel are Lieutenant General retired John Mulholland. On September 11th, then Colonel Mulholland was the commander of 5th Special Forces Group, the first combat formation called to respond to these attacks. This unit is designated to work with foreign militaries and resistance forces with significant language and cultural capabilities that fit in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. I would be remiss if we didn't pause a second to acknowledge that General Mulholland's wife Miriam is with us today. While not in uniform, Mrs. Mulholland also served our nation. She cared for her family when General Mulholland was deployed, and she cared for many other families. She did this with great compassion, grace, and resilience, and was a role model to so many military spouses, my wife included. I'd ask you to join me in a warm round of applause, not only for Mrs. Mulholland, but all of our military spouses who silently serve our nation every day. Also on our panel, Lieutenant General retired Kevin Mangum. On September 11th, then Lieutenant Colonel Mangum was the commander of 1st Battalion, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. General Mangum's aviators would lead some of the most grueling and complex air missions our nation had ever witnessed. They took what seemed to be impossible and they made it look routine. Also, we have Colonel retired Chris Miller. On September 11th, then Major Chris Miller was a Special Forces Company commander. His company was widely regarded as the second best company in the entire Special Forces Regiment. Colonel Miller was deployed to southern Afghanistan and involved in several tactical engagements and was on hand for the movement of Hamid Karzai back in the country to try to restore civilian governmental rule. After retirement from the military, Colonel Miller later served as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center and as the acting Secretary of Defense. Chief Warrant Officer 4, retired Andrew Sentif. On September 11th, Chief Sentif was a flight lead for the 2nd Battalion, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The designation of flight lead signifies that Chief Sentif was one of our most trusted and capable aviators. This designation is something that is earned only by our finest. It has nothing to do with rank. It has everything to do with competence. It ensures that he will only be assigned the most complex and dangerous combat missions, which he would execute without fail. Also on the panel, Command Sergeant Major retired Mario Vigil. On September 11th, then Sergeant Major Vigil was a company sergeant major of what was universally recognized as the best Special Forces company in the Special Forces Regiment. He would help deploy the 1st Combat Forces out of 5th Special Forces Group on the 4th of October, 2001, and was involved in several historical actions in northern Afghanistan, to include being one of the now legendary horse soldiers. Command Sergeant Major retired Jimmy Wilson. On September 11th, then Sergeant Wilson was an MH-60L DAP crew chief serving in 1st Battalion, the 160th SOAR. Not only would Sergeant Major Wilson fly on these incredible hazardous missions, but he had to help figure out how we got those aircraft from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to the country of Oman, and then fly onto the USS Kitty Hawk in the Arabian Sea. A monumental task that only positioned that force to begin the fight. That's our panel today, ladies and gentlemen. To help moderate this panel, we have 2 Bass military scholars, 1 current and 1 alumni. John Barr, a 2nd-year student at the Owen Graduate School of Management, is a veteran of the 5th Special Forces Group. And joining John is Craig Kufall, one of our original 7 Bass military scholars, a 2021 graduate of the Owen Graduate School of Management, and a veteran of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I'm going to turn the panel discussion over to John and Craig. They'll run that. When we get to the end of this, we will have time for questions from the audience, so please start thinking about those now. John and Craig, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. Thank you to all of you for coming out today, and thank you most of all to our panel members for being here. My first question is for you, General Mulholland. So you had recently taken over as the 5th Group Commander prior to the events on 9/11. How quickly after the attacks did you know that 5th Group would be the ones responding, and what was going through your head when these attacks were unfolding in the aftermath?
First of all, thanks, Scott and everybody who helped put this together. And it's truly an honor to be here, especially on this somber day for our nation, when obviously the world changed massively for not just the United States, but literally for the world. Yeah, I had taken command of 5th Group in July, so just 2 months later, this happens. On this day, 23 years ago, I had just come home from running PT, and I learned from my wife that the first plane had already hit the towers. And we were talking about it and whether or not, if it could just be an attack, could just be a horrible accident, when we watched the second plane hit the towers. And the first words out of my mouth were, "We're going to war in Afghanistan." Now, I did not have any, that was a purely instinctive response, that the 5th Group was responsible for that part of the world. And I felt that the Special Forces Group would absolutely have to have a role in whatever the United States did. So it was more a response based on what I know our regiment is capable of and the kind of warfare that we do, and that this seemed to be the right answer. Formally, I did not get the word that 5th Group would not only go to Afghanistan, but we would be the leader of a task force until, I would say, 4 to 5 days later, when I was notified by our headquarters, Special Operations Command Central, which is the headquarters that works special operations issues for Central Command, which owns that part of the world for the United States military, that that decision had been made that 5th Group would be the core of a task force that we would later come to call Task Force Dagger. So it was within the first 3 or 4 days that we formally got recognized, but we began immediately. We started putting teams into isolation, which is a technique we use where we take our detachments, our 12-man A teams, the famous 12-man A teams, and put them into an isolated area, free from any outside interference or distractors, to begin focusing on the future mission. And we didn't know what that mission could be or would be. We had a sense that we would certainly have a role in our classic mission of unconventional warfare, of working with indigenous peoples to work with the resistance, but it was always speculative at the time. But I wanted to get the teams started. There's a number of different things the teams do routinely that needed to get done, and we could get a head start on. Probably the smartest decision I ever made was getting 4 teams into isolation right away, And then concurrently with that, I sent some planners down to our headquarters in Tampa, SOCCENT, that Chris led, to help our headquarters figure out how to use us intelligently, how to plan for us, because I had high confidence that our guys would be very helpful to the staff down there in Tampa. So those were the initial emotions early on.
Thank you, sir. And that actually leads perfectly into the next question, which my next question is for you, Colonel Miller. So you were sent down, like General Mulholland said, to Special Operations Command Central in Tampa, that's SOCCENT. Set the scene for us there at SOCCENT when you arrived. How much of a plan existed, and how did that plan evolve, and what were some of the major challenges that you faced there in Tampa?
It was Friday the 14th, and the group commander, then Colonel Mulholland, shows up in your battalion area. That's never a good sign. And it comes in and goes, "Miller, come here." I was like, what have I done now? I'd worked for Colonel Mulholland before, and he tasked me and he tasked Sergeant First Class Gary Harrington, who had also worked for Colonel Mulholland, to go to Special Operations Command Central in Tampa. And it was the most clear guidance I'd ever received in my entire military and government career. He said, "Get us in the fight." I said, okay, I can figure that one out. Went down there, arrived on the 16th of September, which was my anniversary. And normally I'm gone for my anniversary, and my wife always reminds me that, she's my second love, that I'm with my primary, wife in the military. But for once she goes, "Get the hell out of here. You got to get to work." Went down there, and our counterterrorism task force, which I still don't think we can talk about in public, but they're in like Halo and Call of Duty, Black Ops, all that stuff. Those folks were all down there, and they're kind of like more elite than mere Green Berets, theater, special operations, and a special forces group are. But fortunately, the theme of this whole thing is the community is so small, and I knew everyone down there, and I ran into Bill McGarity, who was behind the secret door, and he goes, "Chris, come on back," and got read on to what was going on. And what we saw happen was our special operations forces, y'all remember the first operations were the Rangers jumped into what was Objective Rhino, and then one of our counterterrorist forces, supported by the 160th Special Operations Regiment, I'd say led by this 160th SOAR, took down Mullah Omar's compound in Kandahar, and they left, and no one knew what to do because it was run. I'll go ahead. I'm going to say it, sir. You're still so kind. It was led by some Navy SEALs that didn't really, I don't think they could have spelled UW, unconventional warfare, if we gave them both. They were superb commandos, but they didn't understand the nuance of unconventional warfare. I'm sitting there, somebody yells, "Does anybody know anything about unconventional warfare?" I'm not making this up. And I was like, I'm in. They ask, who can run the Joint Special Operations Task Force? I did not know what that meant, because I did not pay attention in our training to those higher headquarters. And I said, sounds good. I said, Colonel Mulholland will do it. I'm thinking, wow, mission success, I can go home now. I call back to his operations officer, say, "Hey, Perry, in the game, boss is going to be," I was like, Joint Special Operations Task Force. Hang up, mission success. Give it a couple minutes. "Is there a Major Miller here?" "Chris, what did you do?" I said, "Boss, you said get in the fight. You're going to be like the Joint Special Operations Task Force." "Chris, that's a job only for generals. It's not for colonels. It's not for group commanders. That's a much higher echelon." So I went from hero to zero in about 5 minutes. And General Mulholland, then Colonel Mulholland, says, "I'm coming down." I was like, oh man, here we go again. So I picked him up, and we'd been working nonstop, and it was the first time I'd been not involved in this war planning effort. And I stopped at that mall right by the Tampa airport, the ritzy one. And because I didn't want to be late, because that's not good. And it was kind of pre-cell phone. I think you were the only one in the whole group that had a cell phone. The rest of the unwashed, we were still, like using pay phones and all. You didn't have one either? Okay, yeah. It just shows where we were then. And I remember sitting in that mall waiting to pick the boss up, and you know, I knew we were going to war. And picked him up, and like you saw, it was great because everyone was going about their lives. And that's what America's all about. This isn't like some sort of, you know, anger or anything. It was exactly what should happen. We have a professional military that was getting ready to go, and I knew that we were going to get ready to go. And I picked up Colonel Mulholland and got a lecture on doctrine about, like, Chris, this is how special operations works. I was like, should have paid more attention. And then Colonel Mulholland then took this huge, huge burden and put it on his shoulders and went and accomplished our mission by, our mission was to take down the Taliban and remove them from power and support other organizations in their hunt for bin Laden and to destroy Al-Qaeda.
General Mangum, you were the 160th Task Force Commander on 9/11, and you quickly received the mission to, again, get in the fight, but you had aircraft and crews scattered all over the world. How did you assemble the team, get them into position? How did you lead the people through that? And what else did you see in terms of the nation mobilizing and massing its air power?
So on 9/11, 23 years ago today, we had just landed, and Sergeant Major Wilson was part of the exercise. We had just landed in Sigonella Naval Air Station in Sicily for what was going to be the largest joint special operations exercise that had been held to date. We landed and like 4 o'clock in the morning, the sun was coming up. We were building up our aircraft. We all had a chance to go crash for a few minutes. And I remember I heard this banging on down the hallway, kind of where we were staying. Where's the old man? You know, bang, bang, bang. I was like, what the? And I turned on, there was a TV in this room. I turned it on, and it was Sky News, you know, like the European version of Fox. And I turned it on, and I literally thought it was a Bruce Willis movie. I was like, what in the world is this? And then knock on my door, and it was our Command Sergeant Major, Buford Thomas. He said, boss, you got to get to the jock. So went to the jock, and we had, the rest of our force was in Tazar, Hungary. So we had folks in Tazar, Hungary, we had folks in Sigonella, and you know, as General Mulholland said, you know, that day it was clear our world had changed. The interesting thing is we didn't know if we were going to go home. We didn't know if we were going to go directly from our exercise to bring some firepower on bad guys, and we didn't know if we were going to go home. So we sat there for a couple of days as things were sorting out. Remember, nothing is flying. Nothing is flying in the United States. Finally said, hey, you're going to come home, we're going to come home, and we're going to plan. C5 on the way home, I was sitting up in the flight deck. You know, C5's got a cockpit about as big as this room. So I was up in the flight deck, and I had a headset on, and it was super quiet. And normally when you're flying an aircraft, you hear traffic control. It was super quiet. And I asked the aircraft commander, I said, is it always this quiet? And the young captain turned around and looked at me. He goes, sir, we're the only aircraft over the Atlantic. Wow. Usually there's several hundred aircraft, if not 1,000, going back and forth. We were the only aircraft over the Atlantic. It was surreal, understanding that. We landed at Fort Campbell, and we went from this surreal quiet of being the only aircraft in the sky between Sicily and Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and the division was energized. Fort Campbell, the division was energized. There were aircraft flying around the perimeter. There were gun jeeps literally at the airfield, and anxiety was super high. So I think my advice to our guys was no wasted energy. Do not waste energy doing any nonsense. And focus on the task, focus on the target, focus on the plan. And then the other part of it is, you know, every day, because we knew we were going to go somewhere. We just didn't know where or when. Every day, tell your family how much you love them. Give them a hug. Eat when you can, sleep when you can, PT when you can, and hug your kids and mama when you can. And settle down. Don't get excited till I tell you to get excited. That was really, really hard to do. The night before we left, which was October 7th, I was reading a book to my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, the Harry Potter, this was Harry Potter craze, bedtime story, reading a book, and we came and went all the time. I said, okay, we're done. Hey, babe, and I told her, hey, take care of your mom. I'm going out of town tomorrow. I don't know when I'll be back. Out of nowhere, my 6 years old says, Dad, are you going to fight the Taliban? Wow. So the energy, the emotion, it was all the way down to our elementary school kids. And Chris's daughter and my daughter were playmates there at Fort Campbell. So that was kind of the hysteria around us. So keeping the team focused was pretty challenging. And as Craig said, and Scott Brower, we had to fly to Oman, then we had to get on a ship, then we had to sail over there around where that USS Kitty Hawk thing's showing just to get in position for the fight. So it was super complex, and everybody just had to focus on their task.
Thank you. Sergeant Major Wilson, at that time you were a relatively young soldier and crew chief in the 160th, so a lot of the dirty work, the unglamorous work of getting on board the ship and getting into position fell on you and your peers. Tell us how that happened, what went through your mind, and how were you able to do that hard, dirty work while retaining some focus on the fight that lay ahead?
I think from the moment that we started prepping to go back at Fort Campbell, there was an immense amount of work to do. So it's not hard to focus on the task at hand when that's what you've been trained to do over repeatedly. So we had a lot of helicopters, and we had a lot of mission equipment that we had to get prepared because we didn't exactly know what missions we would be required to do. So we prepped every capability that we had for every helicopter, so when we got there, we could do anything that the ground force asked us to do. That took a lot of time. We were, like General Mangum said, we were working probably minimum of 14-hour days, almost 7 days a week to accomplish that task, leading up to deploying for the missions. Once we got there, if you're an MH-60 prepping an aircraft that comes off of a C-5 Air Force transport aircraft, it's not that hard. We do it all the time. We train hard for it. So prepping the aircraft to get them ready to go to fly out to the aircraft carrier was not very difficult for us. We do it every day, sometimes at Fort Campbell. The MH-47 crews who practice a lot, however, that is a significant maintenance task. And we had 6 MH-47s with us, and they had to build every one of those up it takes them sometimes 12 hours each to build those up. And the teams to do that, that is nonstop dirty work to prep the aircraft, just get them ready to go fly after we got there. And we do it as fast and as we safely can. We train very, very hard to do it. It takes an enormous team of teams to be able to accomplish it. And then aircraft require an enormous a logistical support trail. And so we have to move not only the personnel, their equipment, we have to move the aircraft, all of the parts that we would require for the aircraft to be able to sustain operations off a U.S. naval vessel. And although we train to land and attack naval vessels at times, we don't train a lot to live on them for 70-plus days. So as you can imagine, the U.S. Navy well, they were actually very good to us because they probably wanted to throw us off the ship because they have a lot of rules for a lot of reasons, and we don't like to follow rules for any reason. And so we didn't make a lot of friends fast. The way we overcame that is we send Army aviators up to the tower to work with their naval aviators, and we sent aviation maintenance specialists to work with their specialists, and we built relationships that allowed us to to be able to accomplish the task that we needed to go, because at the time we didn't know when we were going to execute, which is the case most of the time. We just knew that we needed to be ready to execute when this guy over here to my right pulled the trigger.
Thanks a lot, Sergeant Major. General Mulholland, let's fast forward now to early October. At this point, you and the rest of Task Force Dagger are staged in Uzbekistan. You can see on the map there where K2 is marked out, with the mission of infilling SF teams into Afghanistan to link up with the Northern Alliance. Now, there were several attempts to do this that had to be aborted due to weather. Talk to us about the pressure you were under from the highest levels of our government, the Secretary of Defense, in order to get troops on the ground, get boots on the ground in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Well, it's very hard to capture now. I mean, here we are 23 years hence. The environment we were operating in, both for us as a small little task force, and our task force composed of primarily the 5th Special Forces Group, our Night Stalkers and the helicopter assets they brought, which was a combination of armed Black Hawks and Chinooks, and our Air Force Special Operations counterparts who are not represented here today, but were a very important part. And my deputy was an Air Force Special Operations colonel as well, who was an incredible leader, Frank Kisner by name. We were a small little task force, but also the energy and the pressure and the expectations back at home. On top of all that were the expectations I think we put on ourselves, feeling very much that we were carrying the rucksack for our nation in the aftermath of those terrible attacks, and this sense that, one, we cannot fail. Even though the talking heads on TV were already talking about the graveyard of empires and nobody wins in Afghanistan, like, hey, thanks, we don't need that kind of bedside manner there, thank you. But because we're watching CNN, you always have the TV on the jock to get breaking news. But also the fact that we lost so many of our fellow citizens in those, UA 93, of course, the Pentagon, and most devastatingly up in New York. So this sense that we owed those fallen Americans a great deal, and that meant us for us to be successful. So understandably, there was incredible energy from DC, from the Secretary's office, that we get troops on the ground as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the weather was not particularly cooperative in those early days, and as my Night Stalker brothers would tell you, the worst, most incredible hostile flying conditions you would ever expect to meet. And I think I'm being clear here from my pilot friends telling us worst flight conditions they'd ever seen in their lives. You're flying over the Hindu Kush, the mountain range that runs the length of diagonally of Afghanistan. It's the size of the state of Kentucky. It gets upwards of 25,000 feet as it gets close to China at its highest point. It's called the Hindu Kush because that means Indian killer, which is its ancient name, reverting back to the ancient warfare that took place between armies out of India coming into Southwest Asia. The picture speaks 1,000 words. It's brutal. And getting over those ranges in order to put our teams in was daunting. October 16th was our first infiltration, where we took one of the armed helicopters, armed Black Hawks, and disarmed it, DDAP, the DAP. DAP is a defensively armed penetrator, or technical name for the aircraft, in order to put a combined team of special forces and CIA operatives into the ground up into the northwest part of Afghanistan to link up with General Dostum, who was the leader of the Uzbek faction, if you will, of the Northern Alliance. And I will mention here quickly the important role, because also not represented here, are our CIA brothers from the paramilitary portion of the Central Intelligence Agency. But that was a team, that was a partnership that we had that was absolutely phenomenal. And because we all bring different skill sets to the table, the fact that we were able to bring those skill sets together really revealed the power, the strength of what America brings to the fight when we all work together. And when we do work together, we're absolutely unstoppable. And so they were very much part and parcel of this. But we got the first team in on the 16th of October. That was the first boots on the ground from the Special Operations, Special Forces side of the house. And then 7 straight days of terrible weather. And during those 7 days, man, I wish I could have hung up the phone, but you don't hang up in the Secretary of Defense. And he wanted boots on the ground. And but we have incredible men. And in this instance, the incredible professionals of the 160th who knew when to turn around. Because there is no finer flying force in the world than what's represented by the Night Stalkers. And getting you to your target and back, plus or minus 30 seconds, is what they live by. And there were days, there were nights, these were always at night, they couldn't even see the mountains because of the nature of the storms, that they had to turn back. And I couldn't have been more prouder for them for doing that, because a smoking aircraft hole in the middle of a mountain doesn't do me any good whatsoever. I can't get a helicopter back, I certainly can't get that aircrew back, and I damn sure can't get that A-team back. So you have to trust these incredible men that we have on their decision making. That doesn't always resonate back in DC, thousands of miles back in DC when they want to see a product, but you have this incredible force that we have for a reason, and you got to trust the people to do it. And they did. And then finally, on the 26th, I think, it was 7 days, the weather broke enough that we were able to start putting teams on the ground, and some of that pressure started to come off a little bit as we started getting more A-teams on the ground. But it was not fun. There were several generals between me, a colonel, and the secretary, and none of them felt compelled to get in the middle of that. I was really hoping that, come on guys, you got 3 or 4 stars up there, man, anytime. But that's all right, we were fine.
Appreciate that, sir. CDB4 CENTIF, you were that 160th flight lead in the north, tasked with getting those teams in. We just heard about the environmental difficulties from the Hindu Kush, the immense pressure. The 160th has a lot of technology that helps with those things. Air crews get specialized training, but at this time, you were forced to reckon with the limits of both man and machine. Tell us how those missions went in detail, and what kind of forced you to turn back, and how that decision-making went.
Well, I had a great intro, and I really don't want to say how those missions went, because they did not go very well. The weather was awful, and we felt every bit of that pressure to go in. We've got our terrain following radar, which was relatively new on the aircraft. We'd had it for a few years. We'd been training with it, but it had never been designed to work in mountains like the Hindu Kush. We trained with it in the Appalachians at 6,000 feet. We never even took it out to the Rockies. It's just too steep out there, and the Hindu Kush is an order of merit bigger than that. But we went ahead and gave it a shot. For this particular mission, our first mission down in Kabul was roughly 300 miles straight, or 300 miles one way, so 600 and change on the way back, and it was going to take about 8 hours. Of that 8 hours, we spent we turned around the first 3 times we attempted the mission. We come out of K2, climbed the mountains there in K2. We called the Bear, relatively low mountains, about 6,000 feet. Honestly, they weren't really, we didn't even consider those at that time. And then we would run down the flats just north of Mozari Sharif, meet a tanker, get some gas, and then try to jump the mountain. All these things, flying long distances, getting aerial refuel. We knew we were going to do a dusty landing in a riverbed once we got to the river. All those things we do all the time. Honestly, they weren't a factor. The real problem was the 16,000-foot ridgeline between us and the target. When we were planning the mission, we actually didn't have enough performance charts for that mission. We had to go back to Boeing and ask for charts that went above 14,000 feet and below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Boeing gave us those charts. When I talked to the engineer on the phone, the guy said something to the effect of, We didn't put these in the book because no one should be operating a helicopter at these altitudes. Unfortunately, we did not get to pick our war. That's where we had to go, so that's what we did. The first couple nights, our radar, it had a couple of flaws in it that we didn't know at the time. Way technical explanation, but the engineers capped some numbers. They envisioned the most severe thing they could. They designed the radar. Unfortunately, we got to the Hindu Kush, and the Hindu Kush was worse. And what would happen to us is, we would be in the clouds, 300 feet above the ground, climbing up the mountains, everything going fine, and then we would get a little annunciator that said TF data bad, a full climb command, which means we needed to pull 100% engine power and climb the aircraft out. In theory, you would climb above the mountains and turn around and go home at this point, but there was no getting above a 16,000-foot mountain for us. We could only make about 14,000 feet. There was a pass in this mountain that was roughly about 14,000 feet, and the idea was we were going to use the radar to find the pass and then thread the needle in the clouds. So when the radar would fail on us, we turned around the first couple of nights based on the pressure that we were feeling. On the third night, Colonel Buss came to me and he said, hey, listen, I'm going to go in your jump seat tonight. I've got to see what you're talking about. And if this goes bad, if we got to turn back after Rumsfeld called down to the Jockman, I want to be responsible for this, not you. So I really appreciated Colonel Buss for that.
He's a good man.
So we went out flying on our third night. We decided that what we would do is in the lower altitudes, we would ignore the first few warnings. We thought maybe that if we got further in, it would get better, which probably wasn't. Looking back on it, it sounds foolish to say now, but it was really our only. It was the only choice that we had currently at the time. And this particular mission, we were climbing up probably through 4,000 to 5,000 feet. We got the first TF data bad full climb command, and we said, okay, just wait a minute, see what happens. We kind of half did it, and then the radar popped back on. Hey, not too bad. We'll try this again. We'll keep moving forward. So now we're up probably 8,000 to 9,000 feet, and it happens again. We did the same thing, and the radar came back. But as we got close to the ridgeline, as I remember, we were about 5 miles from the ridgeline, 2.5 minutes moving at 2 miles a minute. So we got a TF data bad full climb command, and there was no climb. We were using 100% power just to be where we were. So we had mountains in front of us at 16,000 feet, left and right of us at around 16,000 feet, and now without the radar and in the weather, we had no idea where the pass was. We had no idea how close to the terrain we were. So our really only choice at that point was to roll into a 180-degree standard rate turn. So I did that, and as soon as I rolled into the turn, I remembered that there was an aircraft 3.5 miles behind me coming up the valley following me, so I gave a quick call out to them, said, listen, no questions, you got to turn around right now. These guys were a great crew, real tight guys. They didn't ask any questions, they made the turn, and once they told me they were in the turn, I figured that was one problem I didn't have. Unfortunately, aircraft, helicopters above 10,000, 11,000 feet don't control real well. About halfway through the turn, maybe due to adrenaline, maybe due to the altitude, airplanes controlling fairly slushy, we got into an unusual attitude.
Technical term for "oh crap."
we lost control of the aircraft. The only time in my life I've been in an aircraft that was completely out of control. It could have been 2 seconds, could have been 20. I don't know how long it took, but we got the aircraft righted, and we were able to roll out and get pointed back down the valley. And we were happy to have lived through that. We had one more good surprise on that mission. We thought we were done. I turned to Colonel Buss and said, hey, sir, I think we should probably abort at this point. He said, I was ready to abort 2 Zoom maneuvers ago. And we'd burned up our gas. There wasn't any going forward. So we were pretty happy we were going home. And as we came down in elevation and somewhere around Kunduz, we popped out of the clouds in the flats by Mozari Sharif. And I was thinking, great, we'll be able to get gas, because I wasn't sure that we were going to meet back up with a tanker due to the clouds. Somewhere over here, around 2 o'clock, I saw a little flash I'd never seen before. And then about that time, I got a command dispense from the aircraft. The aircraft jettisoned flares, and at that point, a missile went by the cockpit. If you're watching your Ukrainian videos, you know that helicopters aren't doing real good against shoulder-fired man pads. There's not a lot of helicopter crews walking around that have tangled with one and lived to tell about it. Through no fault of our own, through our equipment in our ASE suite, did exactly what it was supposed to do. But throughout the next, I think, 90 days, we had 14 confirmed missile shots at the aircraft. And we were able to beat all those missile shots. So if I don't ever have to do that again, that'd be great.
I think you're clear.
Amen.
John.
Sergeant Major V. Hill, as Scott said, you were a company sergeant major at the time. You became one of the first Americans in. Talk to us about that infiltration. What's going through your mind, and what's the situation on the ground when you get into Afghanistan?
Well, I'll tell you, John, as Scott mentioned, I was company sergeant major of the best company, arguably in the regiment, certainly in the 5th Group. Originally, we had, our company had gone in to Uzbekistan in October with the mission of running the isolation facility forward. So by doctrine, as General Mulholland spoke, you isolate teams, get them prepared for the mission. And that's what we were doing. We were running through making sure they had everything they needed, support-wise, and just it would take them to the aircraft, load them to take them to the aircraft as the 160th attempted to put them in. And by doctrine, I should not have gone in if we were following our doctrine, because I knew where all our teams were going or had gone. And I thought that this is going to be my war. I'm going to be on this side of the war, and I was fine with that just because that was the mission. General Mulholland, again, we've mentioned the pressure he was receiving to get boots on the ground, and then later on, and correct me if I'm misspeaking here, sir, but pressure to get senior commanders on the ground with these warlords, General Dostum, General Atta, and others. And the decision was made, his decision was to put battalion commanders in as advisors with the warlords. I was a company sergeant major. Our battalion sergeant major was still back at Campbell with teams there pushing folks forward. So by default, I was the senior NCO and selected to go in with our battalion commander, and really a pickup team from our B team, a couple of very competent combat controllers from the Air Force. And as I recall, the night that we got that word, we'd just gotten our heads down about 2 in the morning from a long day at work. We're going to be up, in a few hours. And our battalion commander walked into our tent. Scott and I, slept across from each other, our bunks there near the entrance. And the battalion commander is like kicking my bunk, nudging me, and it's like, "Hey, Mario, get up. We're going in." At 2 o'clock in the morning, I was not in the mood for any kind of jokes, and I said some unprofessional things about quit messing with me, trying to get some sleep. Scott sat up in the dim, little light we had going, and the battalion commander turned to him and said, "And you're not going." And he told me, "Hey, get us a medic, get us a couple commo men, when we're going to wait for then Major Mark Mitchell to come in, and we're going to isolation and going." So fast forward, we go through isolation. As I recall, I think we attempted infill twice. Same thing, get on the aircraft, take off. I'm glad I didn't know the full story. And thanks, Chief, for never sharing any of that till now.
Ignorance is bliss.
But got in the back of those aircraft, and again, we took off a couple times and came back. So our third attempt, and there was talk about other alternative means to infill us. There was talk about rough terrain suits to jump in. I was not a big fan of that. Fortunately, our third attempt, we were able to infill. But again, to your question of how it felt, I was what I thought was the end of my, I was almost at 20 years at that point. I was already kind of looking at that retirement and what I was going to do post-military. And 9/11 happens, and we're in another war. But for me, the overwhelming sense was, I knew this was a sense, for me, I felt a sense of kind of a historic event, that we were going to kind of bring some payback to the folks who had attacked our country. Getting on the ground, how were we met? The 160th put me into combat twice, once in Desert Storm. On MH-60, I fell out of that aircraft on landing. So I said, I vowed to do better into Afghanistan. I didn't. I fell out of the back of that aircraft too. Our Afghan partners and our CIA folks who were on the ground to meet us probably were not very impressed with that inauspicious start. It was an overwhelming sense of relief, number one, to finally be on the ground and to really get going, because everything up to that point had led up. It's now, and you use a football metaphor, we've kicked off, we're on the ground, we're in the game, and we're going from there. But the Afghans were very happy to see us. The team had already been aligned with them, ODA 595, and provided some advisory support and called in some ordnance for them. So they knew what we brought to the table. So that was, we were stepping into a pretty good position. For me, I was just glad to be on the ground and finally being able to get after it.
Appreciate that, Sergeant Major.
Sergeant Major Wilson, back to you. Fast forward a little bit, but you're at this point out on the USS Kitty Hawk in the Gulf of Oman. There on the map, you can see it there with General Mangum. And you're there with a task force of special operations folks, and you're given the first mission to do a raid up near Kandahar on Objective Gecko. That is a long, complex mission. Can you give us a sense of everything that had to come together perfectly to pull that off? And what was the mood like when everyone got back to the Kitty Hawk?
Yeah, so we rehearsed that mission when it got time to go. The distance, as a crew chief, not really my concern. So that's really a pilot planning problem, and it's enormous. As I learned as I grew in Army aviation, an enormous problem set to solve. And then as that played out that night, you start to realize, especially as we came back, what we'd just done, and has never been done since, for the most part. That night, or we got ready to roll out that day. There was almost surreal on the flight deck as we moved out to go to our helicopters. As we did our final briefings, and our team huddled down in the hangar deck of the Kitty Hawk, and moved out to the aircraft. All the naval, we had Hellfires on our DAPs, and all the naval personnel had signed all the Hellfires. It was kind of like World War II type. Take this, Osama bin Laden, maybe some more colorful language to go with it. We turned a lot of those back in. I don't know what happened to them. And then one of the things that sticks in my mind, this is my first combat mission, is my baptism under fire as a young crew chief in the 160th. These things are burned in your mind. You'll never forget them. We get ready to take off, and Major General Tom Drew, who just retired, had told me when we were flying together years before the war that once you get in that helicopter, you're in your office. You'll calm down. It's kind of like Mario saying, once you get, the ground force guys, once we get on the ground, we're ready to roll. And the aviators and the aviation forces, once we get in the helicopters and we crank them up and they start making those familiar sounds, that's our office. We're ready to go. I remember CW5, retired Troy Wagner, telling all of us as we picked up to hover and slide out over the water off the flight deck of the Kitty Hawk, hey guys, make sure your HEEDS bottle's on, which is your emergency breathing apparatus in case you go in the water. Make sure your HEEDS bottles are on, because I don't know what's going to happen once we get out of ground effect. We go from 10 feet off the ground to 75 plus feet off the ground. We didn't know what the power of the helicopters, if we had the power, to Mr. Sento's point. And then we took off, and then we AR'd 5 times in zero illume at altitudes that we'd never AR'd before, and we AR'd 3 times to get to the fight, two to get back, and when we got over the target, all hell broke loose, and they were shooting Hellfires, man pads, heavy machine guns. They put 4 MH-60s into a target that's probably not big enough for 2 Black Hawks for most units. the worst dust cloud I've ever seen in my life. And I've got, dozens and dozens of combat deployments since that. And they pulled it off, and we did our jobs, and we came home. The flight deck when we got back was probably not what you would think. We weren't really running around slapping each other on the fanny or anything like that. We had had an aircraft accident, and we had lost 2 young Army Rangers that night, and so we were waiting for the rest of the force to get back from that.
Sergeant Major Vigil, back to you. Let's jump forward to late November now. The task force has had tremendous success rolling back the Taliban in northern Afghanistan at this point. And there's actually a large surrender of hundreds of Taliban fighters, which turns out to be a false surrender. And those fighters actually take over the fortress of Qala-i-Jangi. Talk to us about the response. You were on the ground, and you were involved in the recovery of the body of CIA officer Mike Spann, the first U.S. casualty in the war in Afghanistan. Talk about the impact of that event and talk us through the response.
I will tell you, John. That morning, so we had infilled, we had ridden on horseback 7-8 days, pretty rapid advance, I think, which surprised all of us, how quickly we were able to really kind of help the takeover or the capture of Mazar-i-Sharif, in support of the Northern Alliance. And we were in the city. There was a sense of, okay, this part's done. What's next? We knew a large amount of Taliban, probably Al-Qaeda, foreign fighters had left the city en route toward Kunduz in that area. But as we reconsolidated there, more forces came in from Uzbekistan, some more of our battalion headquarters element, and we were kind of setting into a little bit more steady state to see what the next mission was. The decision was made to take the fight to Kunduz. So the morning that we were loading out to physically drive out there, we get word early on that a large Taliban force is moving toward the Mazar-i-Sharif airfield. General Dostum sends some folks to intercept them, and we kind of back them up. We have our combat controllers have B-52s circling overhead as a show of force, and there's a surrender negotiation. And previous to this, what had struck me as we had fought them for those 7 or 8 days is that literally there was a lot of back and forth between the Northern Alliance and the Taliban forces on radio and going back, and surrender was part of the game. If you could talk them into surrendering, killing them. A lot of the Taliban foot soldiers were locals who'd been kind of pressed into service to serve the Taliban. So, and then, if they didn't surrender, would drop ordnance, and it just kind of encouraged them to. It just went from there. What you'd find is you'd capture, 40, 50, 60 fighters one day that kind of hurt them into a depression or somewhere, and the next day there'd be 20 of them, and you'd ask, where'd the other 40 go? Well, they're with us now. They've switched their allegiance to us. Okay, all right, we'll figure that one out. But that was so by this time we'd gotten a little bit used to there'd be a surrender negotiation, but this was a much larger force, approximately 300 to 400 coming in on vehicles. And General Dostum had asked us to kind of stand off and let him and his folks do that negotiation, but again, show of force with the aircraft. So we did that, and I mentioned to Scott as we're getting ready to roll out, as they've negotiated the surrender, they're loading them back into the vehicles. I said, they're not searching them. I just noticed, we're watching through binos, and they're loading them up, and they're heading into the city, and we roll out of Mazar-i-Sharif toward Kunduz. So the actions at Qala-i-Jangi, I was only there for the last probably 36 hours of that. We had the fight in Kunduz going on, but we were kept apprised of what was going. Again, to your point, it was a false surrender. There were foreign fighters that knew the game was up for them. If you're an Afghan, you could probably blend back into the population later. but not for the foreign fighters. So there was an uprising at the fortress. Some of our headquarters elements took care of that, but it was a fierce fight, and they weren't surrendering. At the end of the day, when we returned from Kunduz, we rolled out to the fortress to assist and really mop up operations at that point. So a lot of the fighters had consolidated in what we call the pink house in the basement. They were trying to get them surrender, smoke them out, pumping water in there. A lot of different tactics to get them to come out. But again, we were well aware that we'd lost Mike Spann, the CIA officer, and that his remains are still in the compound. So with the assistance of our friendly forces, our Northern Alliance forces, we were able to locate Mike's remains and bring him home, bring him out. At the time, just a sense of relief to recover him. And as we were getting ready to move, it was a kind of a second thought of, hey, does anybody have an American flag? And I'd carried one in Desert Storm. I happened to have it with me, and we used that to cover Mike's remains and move him to the airfield. But at the end of the day, I was incredibly proud of how everyone came together. It was tough emotionally, physically for those folks. I know for our CIA partners to see one of their own be killed, but I was very proud of how we handled that situation. We were able to help bring Mike home to his family. But yeah, it was one of those things you think you have everything planned for, then this goes on, and you got to shift focus.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. And I'm getting the signal that we've got time for about one more question here. I know we could probably keep talking for quite a while, but the question that we wanted to wrap up with is for you, General Mulholland, and really for anyone on the panel. What do you attribute the success that Task Force Dagger had, in terms of rolling back the Taliban control of Afghanistan in a time frame that really probably no one in Washington thought possible at the beginning of this campaign? And what impact did that have on special operations moving forward in the rest of the global war on terror?
So for anyone here who has any sense of the history of Afghanistan, you would know that it sits at a crossroads, right? The ancient Silk Road, et cetera, crossroad of many civilizations. All that means is they've endured hundreds of war or warlike situations across history. And the truth is, most folks do not fare well in Afghanistan. And truth to be told, as we've watched how Afghan ended for the United States, it did not end well for us either. But I will tell you, the historic accomplishment of what this little task force did, and by any measure, Task Force Dagger, 5th Group, 160th Air Force Special Operations Command, partnered with our CIA counterparts, accomplished truly historic things. We were tasked with, as Chris said, destroying the Taliban regime and rendering Afghanistan unsafe as sanctuary for Al-Qaeda. That was our mission statement. A classic Green Beret mission, by the way, like every Green Beret would, give me that mission. Bring down a bad guy government, and that's what I'm here for. And do that through, by, and with your indigenous counterparts. We brought down the Taliban regime with less than 300 Americans on the ground in less than 2 months. Eye-watering. No one expected it. I didn't expect it. I was already trying to figure out how do I deploy 5th Group and keep it here for a couple of years. And they crumbled. They crumbled first and foremost because the United States successfully brought all of its elements of relevant power together there, like I said, like a fist. An open hand and fingers is much weaker than that fist. And the ability for the United States to bring 21st century capabilities, mostly from the air, and combine that with the incredible technology that we've got, and most evident, I would say, on the ground with our special operations aviators and the technology that they marshal and master into a form that allows them to do the incredible things they do in the air, with this incredible human element on the ground, which were the men of Special Forces and our counterparts from the agency and some ground Air Force combat controllers. The secret to our success was the fact that we have absolutely incredible men and women in our formation. And the truth of the matter is, there was no real plan for how we were going to fight Afghanistan. A broad context. Link up with indigenous counterparts, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, the Pashtun, the Hazara, the Turkmen, et cetera, all the ethnic groups in there, and do something magical with them to bring the Taliban down. That's as detailed as truly the plan ever got. When you hear people say the plan for Afghanistan, ask them what plan. Because the truth of the matter was there wasn't one. And or in some ways, could there have been one? It was such an unknown thing. We did not, Special Forces prides itself on doing detailed analysis of the places we go. We had no time for that in Afghanistan. I didn't have Dari speakers or Farsi speakers or Urdu speakers. I had some Arabic speakers, had some Russian speakers, and they were able to make that work. What we did have was exquisitely trained and committed professionals who are the product of how we select and assess people into Special Forces, into the Night Stalkers, into AFSOC, et cetera. And when you put those men into that mission set, which is impossible to convey the danger of those early days. We did not have any of the enablers or the timing to response to help somebody in trouble that we came to enjoy over 20 years of incredible accelerated growth and sophistication in how we fight. In those early days, my response time to a team in contact would be measured in many hours, too late to be of meaningful help. So you had 12 or most normally 10 guys with their indigenous counterparts figuring out what to do on the ground with their counterparts who they really can't speak to well to accomplish an objective. And the truth of the matter is the plan was teams calling back to us telling us, here's what I can do in my patch, here's what I can do in my patch, and us threading that together into a campaign in order to achieve an effect. So what was, and I say this for the 5th Group and 160th veterans who are out here, you guys were the magic. And for you, some young folks here in uniform, you are part of the future magic. It is what we invest in the people who come to wear the uniform in the United States, especially in our special operations community, and put in them, the skills commensurate with the talent that they bring, married together with the will and the absolute determination that you will succeed no matter what, and then trusting them to do their job in the situations that they're in. And that's what carried the day. That's what allowed a truthfully, I mean, this wasn't Alexander the Great's armies. This was 300 Americans bringing down a heinous regime that provided sanctuary for the bastards who attacked our country 23 years ago this day. That was the magic. The men of these fantastic regiments, Special Forces, the 160th, our counterparts from AFSOC, and certainly the men from CIA. It's the people who made that difference.
Thank you, sir.
We're going to go ahead and bring the lights up now and take 2 questions from the audience that are going to be answered in a concise manner so that we don't miss any planes. But while Craig and John are moving out to the audience, I do want to ask General Mangum, sir, as we've talked through this before, you talked about what we thought we could do on September 10th in the special operations community. Could you touch that just concisely here, sir?
I'll do my best. 3-round burst. The human element, as General Mulholland mentioned, was absolutely critical to this. And a big piece of that human element was training, 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 drilling, 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 practicing, 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 a whole lot of tough stuff. On September 10th, we didn't know how good we were. We didn't know what we could do. We didn't know what we didn't know. We were literally the Maserati in the garage. On September 11th, we pulled the Maserati out, and we put the foot on the gas, and we rolled. And the whiff the hint of what we could accomplish as a force, as a joint force, was powerful and gave us really an idea of what we could accomplish in other places at other times, and the real power of our Special Operations Force. So, and you saw I was wearing woodland camouflage on the deck of the Kitty Hawk. For some reason, we talked ourselves into it was a good idea to wear that into the desert mountains. So we didn't know what we didn't know, and but we launched, as Sergeant Major Vigil said, because we had some business to do, and when we went to Mullah Omar compound, the leader of the Taliban, we picked up a radio intercept that said, if they can do this, may God help us. That was true for every soldier, sailor, airman who was on the ground, in the air, doing the deal, bringing the fight to the Taliban. So then we got rolling. We knew we were going to be in Afghanistan for a while when we started getting mail in Bagram in December of 2001. Or no, yeah, December, wasn't it 2001? December 2001. We're like, wow, we may be here a month or two. Who knew? But sorry, that was longer than 3 rounds.
Yes, sir, it was. First question, please. Any questions?
Come on, folks.
I got one.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Emmett Goldstein. I'm a senior here at Vanderbilt, and I'm the cadet battalion commander for the Vanderbilt Army ROTC program. First of all, I just want to thank you all for being here and for the tremendous sacrifices you guys have made for our country. So I was born and raised in Manhattan. All of my family was either friends with someone who was killed in 9/11 or was nearly killed themselves. So it truly means a lot to have you guys here. My question is, being that you were the first soldiers and officers to deploy overseas and locate and engage the enemies responsible for this attack, what did that feel like? And was there ever a moment where it dawned on you the significance of the operations that you were conducting?
1 round. It felt really, 2 rounds. It felt really good.
Yeah. Command Sergeant Major Vigil said it best. I had the same feeling. We knew we were doing something super important. I read a book by Studs Terkel about the Good War, where he talks about people that landed at D-Day, these famous people, and what was the most important day in your life? They're like, landing at Normandy. I felt very much the same way, that we were very honored and blessed to be able to be part of, we're not supposed to say vengeance and all that stuff anymore, but this was payback, and to be able to be part of that, I can't speak for everybody here, but it was the most important thing I ever did professionally in my life.
Rest assured, from the moment we got the mission, I would say even before that, we understood what we were about. We understood. I mean, I will tell you, it felt heavy. You felt like you were carrying the hope, the expectations of your entire nation on your back. And so our greatest fear was not that of the enemy, it was of failing the American people. And particularly those who had paid such a heavy price that day. That was from the very beginning, so.
Our second and last question.
Hi, my name's Cody Pickford. I'm one of the Bass Scholars here at Vanderbilt. I want to start with the thank you, but get to it as Scott asked. So this is specifically for Colonel Miller and CSM Wilson, but if anybody else has any comments. Both of you would have seen this conflict pretty early in your careers relative to where you ended. One is the CSM and one is the ASD Solik and acting secretary. Is there anything that you saw kind of earlier, or like an opinion that you had that then kind of changed as you got further along in your career towards the end of it?
Oh, I have to go first. I'll be brief. General Mulholland and his colleague from the CIA were sitting one day, you don't remember this, sir, and it was, we were like probably 10 years into the war, and you all said, well, we're the last ones here, everybody else got their t-shirts and left, and we're gonna see this through the end. I don't think we ever expected that we were gonna go that long, and you know, life changes, you have to retire, he has to retire, and I had this epiphany one day, like, oh, holy crap, I'm the only one in that room, and it's up to me now. And it's not up to me, that sounds so egotistical, but that was such a powerful experience, and so I was committed to trying to end the war on our terms, and continued on, and I always carried the lessons that General Mulholland and those that have gone before that trained me with me about, you know, we got to see this thing through to victory, and that's kind of how I ended up just muddling forward, because that day where you said, we got to win it.
Amen.
You know, and I'll be brief. I think my biggest takeaway from 20 plus years of war, starting off as a young NCO and culminating my career as a command sergeant major, was, you know, we were always the group. You always had the group saying the next generation is not as good as our generation, and they're not going to be the ones that lead us into the future. Well, that was wrong. 100% wrong. We took these kids all through the war in Iraq and Afghanistan that nobody thought were tough, nobody thought they were strong, and they kicked ass all over the planet. So that's what I took away from it.
Well said.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand it over to Brian Winsky, the President and CEO of the Fort Campbell Historical Foundation, for some closing comments.
Well, all I really want to do is convey thanks here. Thanks to all of you for being here, your support to the foundation. Thanks to the co-sponsors of this event, that this day wouldn't be possible without it. Thanks to Scott. You know, this was his idea as we concluded the last version of this, and I don't think this could have gone any better. And as I thank our panelists here, we're giving them a special gift on behalf of the foundation. But I couldn't imagine a more appropriate thing to do today, the anniversary of the September 11th attacks on our nation, than to hear from those who served on the cutting edge of the fight, their accounts of the opening chapter of our military response to those attacks. And gentlemen, we can't thank you enough. And on behalf of the foundation, a small gift. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Good job, man. Good job, son. Yes, sir. You too. Good job, gentlemen. Hopefully we'll make this live, sir.
Hey, you're on time. I think you're on time. Yeah.
Thank you. Stop.
Again, thanks. You know, our mission is to educate, honor, and inspire, and I think we've met all three of those today, and we're certainly inspired by your accounts of, again, the cutting edge of that fight. Impressive, inspiring. I got to thank the namesake of this leadership lecture series and his support to the foundation over the years, over the decades, and his trajectory-altering generosity is going to result in us opening next year a world-class museum that is going to educate, honor, and inspire, and showcase the incredible histories and legacies of the great units that call Fort Campbell home. And it's going to be substantially larger, 7 times larger than the current museum. And a big reason behind that is to expand in a significant way that which reflects the history of the 160th Special Ops Aviation Regiment, the 5th Special Forces Group, and of course the 101st. Good news. The foundation's poured, it's underway, the underground utilities are in, the drainage and all that work is underway. We're gonna have walls up by November, we're gonna have the roof on it by December, we're gonna have it loaded up with world-class artifacts starting about this time next year, and it's gonna be open to the public in 2026. And we are, 2025, correction. We are super excited for that, and it wouldn't be possible were it not for Jack's generosity, leadership, vision, and his drive seeing this through. And that's why we're at where we're at, and we're at where we're going to be next year. So let's give Jack Turner a round of applause.
Can I give you a hand?
Thank you all. Thank you.
Folks, I just want to quickly thank all of our sponsors for today, Mr. Turner, the Vanderbilt Institute for National Security, Bass Military Scholars Program, the Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Civ Mill Partnership Program, and Lipman Brothers. We are pressed for time. There is a reception out back that we are all welcome to attend. Our panelists will be out there. You can engage with them, as well as many members from the current force that are fighting inside of both of those units. Thank you so much for being here with us today. God bless each and every one of you. God bless America. Thank you.